All right, so today I'm going to be taking a look at the Okinos Cypress 3. Okinos was kind enough to send me this case to do a review on it. And just to remind you guys, I don't do reviews where somebody pays me to say something nice, right? I only do reviews based off of what I see, what I feel, whether or not I would use it myself or whether or not I would buy it myself. So let's take a look. The packaging was fairly standard, not double boxed, but the case itself seemed well protected. The case is more compact than other mATX cases, but has a nice look and feel to it with genuine walnut. The top filter is magnetically held and feels pretty standard compared to other cases. The bracket on the bottom of the glass panel sits slightly low, and I'm going to get into that as we get further into the case review. The glass panel slides back and is hooked in slots where it sits at the bottom ridge of the case. Once slid back, you can lift it up and out. The side panel also slides back slightly to lift out, but sits on a thin ridge, and I nearly dropped it. From a presentation standpoint, the fan wires could have been placed more neatly on the vertical channel near the cable access holes rather than the top. The accessories box comes with your necessary screws for the motherboard, the power supply, fans, etc. It also includes 3 standoffs and a couple of PCI back plates and 5 zip ties. It's a $60 case, so it's pretty cost effective. And for $60, it's a decent case. There were some concerning things that I'm going to go over with you guys. You know, first and foremost, I do like the front of the case. I'm not a big fan of the whole wood aesthetic for PC cases, but this one was, it came out kind of nice looking, right? It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Antec Flux and Flux Pro. And so it's not, you know, overwhelming like some other cases. I mean, everybody seems to like the fractal design ones, like the Fractal North, I think it is. And some others that have like slats of wood in the front. And honestly, they're not appealing to me. They look kind of like speakers to me, like old school speakers. I'm sure other people love them to death and like that aesthetic. Nothing wrong with that, just not for me. But anyways, you know, subtle is nice, right? And it's a solid case. There's no flimsiness about it, so that's always nice to see. Even for a $60 case, you can't really ask for a more solid built case. But all that being said, there were some things that I didn't like. There were some things I did like about this case. And so, as I've done in past videos, I created a list of stuff to make sure I don't forget anything. The screw at the bottom of the glass, the bracket itself sits kind of low, so the hole isn't quite lined up. And so it rubs up against the top part of the hole that the screw goes into. And so it makes it kind of tough to turn. I even peeled off some paint in unscrewing it. I thought that was probably just a machining error. A machining error on this. So I wasn't too concerned with that. I'm sure that for the most part, this is perfectly fine on most of the Cypress 3 woods that go out. The fan wires were a little on the messy side, so I'm going to take this part out. And that was the other thing. I didn't like it that these weren't captive screws. I mean, prime example, the screw just falls. So, you know, I do like the captive screws. But you know, you have to make some concessions when you're dealing with a budget case, which is what this is. And it's a good looking case for 60 bucks, right? And so, you know, this was hanging up here, and yeah, it looked kind of messy and straggly, but it's because it's got the fan splitters on it. And so once I built in it, I was able to pretty much cable manage with some zip ties and bring along this channel, and then underneath to plug into a fan header in the motherboard. So it wasn't a big deal after the fact. It just kind of looked messy. And so I'm glad that it wasn't a problem. And while on that subject, it doesn't have a fan hub. It's got, like I said, fan splitters right here, and then an extra long fan cable or fan wire so that you can route it however you need to for the back exhaust fan. One of the things I did like was the audio cable, the HD audio cable. It's all black instead of the ketchup and mustard that you always see on the HD audio cables. So I love that. Thank you, Okinos, for doing that. I've always thought to myself, why is this particular connector always ketchup and mustard? No matter what, no matter how expensive the case is, always ketchup and mustard. So I haven't run across any other case that has done this. So if you know of some cases that are doing that, then please let me know. Because yeah, I love that look. The downside though is for the front panel connectors, it's got the separate little pins in there, and I hate that. That is always a pain in the butt to put on the front panel header. It's fairly common nowadays to have that standardized, nearly standardized connector where it's all in one. It's really easy to work with, really easy to manage, right? So please, Okinos, consider that, all right? I don't know that it's going to cost you all that much more. I mean, the amount of plastic that you're using for the pins is probably about the same amount, right? So I don't see how that's going to increase your costs any. There's also 6 screws right here for the hard drive cage, right? And these 4 screws right here have rubber washers on it, so they slot into these holes so that when these 4 are loosened and these 2 are removed, you can easily lift it up and pull it out through the larger holes, right? And it slots right back in nice and easy. And I like the rubber washers because that for spinning drives and everything, you get a little bit of vibration, and so that's a nice little touch. And so I don't know that you need these 2 screws to secure it even more to the case. I think these 4 are going to be plenty. And so I would consider removing that. And that reduced cost could potentially go towards, you know, the front panel connectors. The bottom filter right here for the power supply is bracketed in, so you don't slide it out. You're gonna, unfortunately, you're gonna have to pry it out and then finagle it somehow back in. So which means that you might have to move your PC around. Luckily, this is a smaller case, so it's easier to do that kind of thing with. I don't like it when I see this. I'd rather have a slide tray. Even if it means that it slides out from the back, it's better in my opinion, but this is a cost savings without having to put in like a plastic frame. So I kind of get that. So the porosity on the glass side at the bottom right here is probably around like 40%, so it's not all that great, but it's not all that concerning either because it's actually acting as a filter at the same time. It should be fine on thermals. I don't see an issue with it. And the top porosity without the filter is probably closer about like 60%, and that's pretty good, as well as the bottom of the motherboard bay area. Where you could put a couple of fans, the porosity on there is probably like 60%. Maybe it's 70%. I don't know. I don't have any measuring tools for that kind of thing. I'm just pure guesswork at this point. And the front side, the porosity is probably closer to about like 30 or 40%. But again, this is actually acting as a filter for the intake fans at the same time. So it's understandable. And by the way, you could pull this front panel off by pulling it from here, right? And it's nubbed in. It's not like magnetically placed or screwed in. You just pull it right off from the bottom and it'll come right out. And going back to the top right here. So as you can see, the porosity is pretty good on here. And it can fit 120 millimeter fans and 140 millimeter fans, two of those. And I'll circle back to that here in a second. But the porosity is pretty decent. And so if you've got fans right here, especially if they're set to exhaust, I would remove this filter because you're gonna actually block the exhaust because the porosity on the filter isn't all that great, right? If this was intake, then maybe use the filter. But if you're using exhaust right here, which I imagine most people will, I would just remove the filter. I said I was going to circle back to this. So you have room for two 120 millimeters and two 140 millimeter fans right here. But there doesn't seem a whole lot of room for an AIO. So the motherboard sits fairly close to the top, close enough to a point where I don't think you're going to be able to fit a radiator and fans in here. So the fans right here are mounted on the inside of the bracket, right? And there's room for 3 120s or 3 140s, right? And so that's nice that you can do that. But if you put the fans, because there seems to be enough room on the inside right here, where you could put the fans on the outside of the bracket, depending on the thickness of the fans, and then potentially put a radiator on the inside. So you could theoretically put 360 mil AIO or even a 420 mil AIO in here. You absolutely would not be able to do the AIO and the fans all on the inside of that bracket because there's just no room, as you can see, to fit a radiator along with fans. The 4 fans, while we're on that subject, are 420 millimeter fans, non-RGB and non-PWM. These are the Okinos Hurricane 12s, which was really next to impossible for me to find online, other than the description of this case, which tells me that these are 1000 RPM static fans, which is fine to a certain degree, but I'm going to come back to those fans and that 1000 RPMs here in a little bit. The mounting area right here for the GPU, this part is slightly bent this way, right? And so I was a little bit worried when I was working in the case and putting a motherboard and GPU and all that stuff in there on whether or not that was going to be a problem. And it was. The holes for the mounting bracket on the GPU were not aligning properly with the holes right here. And so that, again, similar to the screw that I ran into a problem with on the glass, is probably just either a manufacturing error or it was somehow bent in transit, but I don't see how it was bent. Sorry, I don't see how it was bent in transit because it was fairly protected in the box, right? So it had to have happened somewhere during the manufacturing process, I believe. Just like with that screw for the glass, I think it's probably going to be like a one-off thing where I just had the luck of the draw, whereas most of them are probably going to be fine, but just so you're aware. In the area that the power supply goes, there's these two padded areas right here for vibration and stuff, and these are, they don't look thick, but they are. They're pretty thick. And so I like that. That's a nice little touch. Not all cases come with something like that for anti-vibration, so I really appreciated that little touch there. And speaking of pads, the feet have little pads on them too, and that's nice for, you know, a slight cushion on the tabletop or wherever you have it, and sliding it around and things like that. Plus it's a slight anti-vibration thing. So that's a nice little touch too. I really like that. The motherboard tray has 6 standoffs, and the area that you're working in is probably way better suited for an ITX motherboard than it is for a micro ATX motherboard. But while we're on the subject of it, the micro ATX motherboard, for that configuration, Okinos, you need 2 more standoffs. I know that 3 came in the accessories box, but you should just have them there. They're not getting in the way if you put them in there. And why not? More people are going to use an ATX motherboard than an ITX motherboard, right? So you should just have the standoffs already there, and maybe have 2 extra standoffs in the box instead of 3. Also, this standoff right here, it sits slightly shorter than the other 5. And so I could not fit a screw into that standoff with the motherboard mounted. All the other standoffs worked fine, but this standoff, not so much. So that's a little bit concerning. I don't know if it was just over torqued into the case or what, which means that the screw can't catch onto the threads and screw down. And going back to the power supply side, although I did like the little pads and everything, in order for me to fit the power supply in here along with the cables, I had to remove the hard drive cage, which, you know, that's fine, I guess, to a certain degree, but, you know, it was just a little annoying. And then, you know, getting the hard drive cage back in once the cables and the power supply were in was a little bit on the tricky side. So you're gonna have to exercise a little bit patience in order to facilitate that, because there's not a ton of room, because this case is actually a decent amount smaller than a lot of other mATX cases. So just be aware of that. All right, so you got a whole lot less room to work in under here. Also, because it's length, depth, whatever. This measurement right here of the case is, like I said, smaller than a lot of other mATX cases. And because of that, there are some 3-fan GPUs that are not gonna fit. I used a 3-fan Asus GPU, a Strix model, a 1080, which is, you know, relative to other 3-fan cards that are newer, isn't that large, right? But that would not fit into this case, right? So I ended up using a 2-fan MSI 1080 card, and that fit fine. I think it ended about right here. There's going to be a decent number of 3-fan GPUs that are not going to fit in this case. So if you have a 3-fan GPU, this is probably not the case for you. Finally, the thermals on here on this case weren't bad. There was really nothing concerning about it. Remember I said I was going to circle back to the 1000 RPM fans. So, you know, the airflow seemed okay, but I was using mid to lower tier kind of components in here. Keeping in mind that these are non-PWM fans and they're at 1000 RPMs, no higher, and there's 4 120 millimeter fans, you know, the amount of airflow that it's going to provide is going to be limited and static, right? And so just be aware of that. You might want to consider putting at least another fan up here and probably 2 fans up here for exhaust, or swapping out these fans for some PWM fans. So there's some give and take, and obviously, like I said earlier, concessions that you have to make for a case that is $60. Overall, this case is fine. There's nothing wrong with this case. It's a decent case. I kind of like the size of it because it's a smaller case without going into an ITX form factor. So I kind of like it in that sense. Oh, it's also got a USB Type-C port, which is always nice to see in a budget case. There's a decent number of them that don't have that. So good one on you, Okinos. Like I said at the beginning, I'm of two minds about it. You know, it's a solidly built case. It's $60. And so and it's got a USB Type-C, which not all budget cases have. But there are concessions that you have to make with a case at this price point. It looks nice, it feels nice. So I would say probably if you've got some extra fans that are PWM and you want a nice budget case that's going to actually look nice as well and be on the smaller side of the mATX cases, then this is probably a good case for you. If you don't have extra fans and you don't want to spend extra money on fans, then maybe not this case, unless your components are mid to lower range where their TDPs are lower, and so they're not going to get overly hot regardless of the fans. Like I said, overall, I do like the case. There are things that I would change about this case if it were up to me. Such as, for instance, the fact that you can only fit 120 millimeter fans here. I would make adjustments to be able to fit 140 millimeter fans as well. I never liked the twisty, tear off IO backplate covers, or whatever you want to call them. I always like them to be slid off, and the extra 2 that comes with the case actually are the slide-in type, which is nice. But I don't like these because, you know, I can't count the number of times I cut myself on these, and they're a pain in the butt. I would also change the front panel connectors to the more easy to work with type of connector. I love the HD audio connector being all black on the wires. Thank you for that. I love that. Can't get over that. That's probably my favorite thing right there. If you got any questions for me, or if you think I missed anything on this case review, please write down in the comments and let me know. And if you want me to do more case reviews like this, I'd be more than happy to. Just let me know down in the comments that you want to see more of these. All right, so that's it for now. That's the Cypress 3 wood. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one.